Hello, and welcome to the FI Entrepreneur, Financial Planning for the Risk Taker. This podcast will show you how to achieve FI through entrepreneurial pursuits by developing a well-calibrated and thought-out plan for risk management so that you can maximize the rewards.
Hosted by certified financial planner, enrolled agent, and serial entrepreneur Ben Martinek, this is the FI Entrepreneur, Financial Planning for the Risk Taker.
The information presented in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. None of the content is presented as investment advice. Consult your financial professional before acting on any of the information presented in this show. Hello, everybody. This is Ben Martinek with the FI Entrepreneur and Andrew Bensavenga, my co-host. Welcome to this episode. We are going to be discussing the basics of FI. This builds on the last episode that we had in which we talked about the different stages of financial growth, the 7 stages. If you want to learn more, be sure to refer to that in the show notes, jump over to that episode. Some of this is going to overlap and be similar to what we discussed in the prior episode, but it's a different take, and this is a little more up to the speed in the literature of financial independence, at least as it's currently being drafted and created. The thought here is what different stages or maybe high water marks or levels, metrics of FI would you like to achieve? And they're going to be similar to those stages of financial growth, specifically with financial security, financial independence, and ultimately financial abundance. But before we get underway with the episode, why don't I bring my co-host on, Andrew Bensavenga. How you doing, Andrew?
Very well. Thank you, Ben. Today's a good episode, and if I might introduce it a little bit more as well, we are not actually talking about steak and meat or the difference between my body mass index and Ben's. We are actually talking about levels of FI, and it's a very good way to frame this conversation. Whereas the previous episode, we talked about the levels that you are on the way to getting to FI, but this is really focusing on that FI stage. What does FI mean to you? What does FI look to you? So I'll leave it to Ben to kind of bring out these terms and hopefully keep my expanding waistline out of the conversation.
I don't know if I quite follow, Andrew. What are you referring to? Does FI mean something else here that I'm unaware of?
So the two main ways that we talk about FI, kind of like before and after the holidays.
I see.
The lean style of FI and the fat style of FI. So, before Thanksgiving, you're feeling pretty good. You just got out of the summer. You had your beach body. Maybe once I had one of those. And after the holidays, you're feeling a little bit fat. But of course, Ben, we put this show together. You've heard of lean FI and fat FI. Do you want to touch upon those a little bit?
I'm glad you finally brought that all together. I wasn't quite following yet.
This explanation was getting a little bit chubby.
Yeah, so listeners, if you're not aware, there are 3 stages of FI, and they're lean FI, fat FI, or what's also being referred to as coast FI. So lean or fat, Andrew was talking about his waistline. And Andrew, before marriage or after marriage, right? Is that not true of all of us? Yes, that's right. We're going to go down a rabbit hole if we're not careful, but there's some evidence that they say that the kinder sex, the better sex of us purposely tries to fatten up the males once married to fend off any competition from other women. And so you typically bring on about another 20 pounds, they say, when you first get married, which has been true in my own experience. And so this is a subconscious effect, but we're not talking about the trappings of the feminine counterparts who of trying to fatten you up into FI. Although there might be some truth to this, it's not uncommon that our lady friends like to spend a little money. Maybe you're going to have a fat FI in order to keep the wife at home happy. So let's lean FI and fat FI. Kind of the inspiration to financial independence, if you're not familiar with this, is Jacob Lundfisker and his book, Early Retirement Extreme. If you've never read that, you might want to give it a look over, although Jacob has some interesting views and takes. I don't know if I would say I'm endorsing all of them, but he really is the inspiration behind all of this movement. Mr. Money Mustache ultimately picked up and was interviewed and was inspired to early retirement or financial independence because of Jacob Lundfisker. Jacob Lundfisker is an astrophysicist who early on describes this as a conversion from consumerism, where he was living the typical American life and enjoying a nicer house, nicer car, bigger dinners and the like, but then found himself chained to work and show up and do his job every day. At a relatively young age, in his mid to late 20s, he said, I don't really want to do this any longer. I'm going to flip this whole thing on its head, and I'm going to try to be done with work as fast as possible. And he sought to achieve this by living incredibly frugally. And even to this day, that's still the case. I think Jacob did come into financial independence, FIRE in probably his early 30s, I believe. And by doing so, because he just amassed a small nest egg and he's able to make that work, although I think he has other sources of income now at this point in time, but he's able to make that work because he just lives so simply. I mean, we're talking like not just beans and rice, we're talking like lentils and like buying a sweater once every 20 years and like throwing patches on it. And I mean, like
knitting his own sweater from the lentil residue.
That's exactly right.
When you're bringing out the lentils, you know that you're in trouble.
Right.
As I've tried to keep off some of these marital pounds, which my wife has had no trouble putting on me, I have actually been eating some beans, and I had never really done it. Like, a pot of beans lasts you forever, and also healthy as can be. But if you are interested in FIRE of any kind of financial independence, beans are definitely the way to go. And now when we're talking about lean and Jacob Lundfisker, how lean are we talking about? What is the definition of lean FIRE?
The inspiration again here is just live super simple, super frugally. And I think that's kind of the notion of the whole FIRE sense. Like we're trying to get there as fast as possible. And perhaps we'll give an episode here soon enough just to delve into specifically how impactful your savings rate is as to how quickly you achieve financial independence. But the more you ultimately save, the sooner you get there is the simple answer to all of this. If you can live very simply, you can get there very quickly. So typically we're talking about folks, lean FI really just means somebody who is living below average income, who's making things work on less than average workings. $60,000 a year, I suppose, in particular, is the definition or the number that people are going for. Of course, this is going to change over time. For a lot of folks, 60,000, especially in the urban areas, would not get you very far. But the inspiration or the desire in financial independence is you just want to be free. You don't want to have an alarm clock. You don't want to be able to wake up any longer. Going back to Jacob Lundfisker, he just wanted to be able to tinker around and not have any other commitments on his time. He's able to wake up every day and kind of do as he pleases. And if he wants to stroll around in his backyard, I don't know, wearing his bathrobe, so be it. He can do that, right? So that's lean FI. Now, there's pluses and minuses to lean FI. You'll certainly get there quicker, but you are kind of committing yourself to a simple existence. And even with that simplicity, you have perhaps concerns of whether or not you can make it work all the way. Do we just not have enough padding, quite frankly, to get us to where we want to go? And so we have really this other side of the coin now called fat FI. Now we're talking about fat, or some padding. I mean, what is that? Well, it's simply living above $60,000 a year. So rather than simply shooting to have a simple FI, lean FI, we're living pretty much close to what you're currently living at, your common or comparable standard of living expectations. The challenge with that is it's a higher goal to meet. It requires more income, but I suppose it's a fatter FI. So two big decisions to make here is what are you shooting for? What do you work towards? Are you looking to be lean, mean and lean, and just get there as fast as possible so they don't have those commitments on your time, especially if you don't particularly like your career or where it's going or just the demands of your daily job? A lean FI makes a heck of a lot of sense. But in terms of comfort level, a fat FI is probably the better goal, especially since we're kind of in a situation where most people want to continue working in some capacity even after they've achieved financial independence. So how am I doing here? Is it lean and fat? Anything else to add, Andrew?
Well, I think you brought up a couple really good points, and I'd like to double down on a couple of them. So the first was how lean versus fat looks in different parts of the country, right? All of these situations, all these conversations are incredibly personal. The idea to even pursue FI is outside the box. So you've got to, in all of these conversations, make this work for you. But like if you're in the middle of the country, living in a farmhouse, the cost of living that you're going to experience is going to be a lot different than if you're in the middle of Manhattan, right? So your lean versus someone else's lean might be a very different thing.
For sure. And if you want to live in, I suppose, in the long term in downtown Manhattan and try to be in financial independence, I suppose good for you. And you obviously are going to have a lot more of a stiff headwind in that sort of circumstances with just all the expenses that you would incur. So, I mean, there's some tricks of the trade to turn around and minimize and make this work. I hate to go ahead and jump right into those because we haven't gotten into our third type of FI, but let me tease you a little and just let you know that we have...
Steer you away from rabbit holes, right?
Yeah, that's right. But what about fat FI? I mean, Andrew, what are you pursuing? What's your goal here?
Me, definitely fat FI. I like to live. I like to eat. I like to drink. I like to go out. So for me, I need to have those things in my life. And one of the things that you also touched on before was the idea of sustainability. When we do the financial planning and we get a client in front of us and they're young and they're saving a heap of money. And sometimes I look at their cash flows, I look at their plan and they tell me they're only spending like $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month. And I look at Ben and I'm like, this is crazy. They are never going to be able to continue doing this because what's fine for you at one point in your life isn't always fine for you as you continue. The older you get, the chubbier you get, the more kind of stuff you want. And I think that is really inescapable part of life. So even if you might start in lean FI, I think mentally you want to prepare yourself for the idea that you might be in the situation to transition into a fatter FI. So hopefully one of the things that we do here, we talk about businesses and side hustles and ways to massage your passive income to allow yourself that flexibility to move from lean and into fat. Because I mean, at the end of the day, who would say, okay, if you want lean or if you want fat, who's going to say, oh yeah, I would like less, please? It's just, it really doesn't happen. So,
Well, I suppose I want to defend the lean folks a little bit because I think I lean a little towards lean. We've definitely had the simpler ways. And, there's different ways of being resourceful. This all depends on just what kind of money do you need to get by and how much can you be a do-it-yourselfer and manage and, fix repairs around the house versus wanting and needing someone else to do that as an example for yourself. And so, fat FI, just is kind of what's implied there, has more padding. It has more slack in the system. It's probably a more realistic plan and it's probably a better goal on the whole to be shooting for. It just gives us more cushioning, literally in the plan in case things don't pan out. But I wouldn't want to encourage anybody to become too much of a saver and not enough of a spender because we can see this just even in a more conventional retirement space where people are really good at sowing, as we say, but not very good at harvesting. They're very good at saving and putting money away, but they struggle with spending the money. And as good as I think it is to make sure we have a strong cushion in any financial plan you build, at the end of the day, we're going to spend this money or why else are you making it? It's not going to go with you when you die. So I wouldn't want fat FI to be a cover for somebody's obsession with saving too much because that's, in my opinion, that's kind of pointless. You might as well just not make the money. But we've talked enough about lean and fat, I think, Andrew. Let's talk a little bit about this third option called coast. This is an interesting phenomenon and really starts to highlight the notion of financial independence, the FI component of what was previously known as FIRE and cutting off this retire early. The reality is a lot of people like to work. They don't know what to do with their time if they weren't working. And so they want to have some freedom or flexibility and especially be the one in charge of life, having it under their control, be their own boss, even if they're a W-2 wage earner, even if they're an employee. And the way to really do that is by super funding your savings and getting yourself to a point that you've got a chunk of money there. And, you could potentially walk away if you needed to, but you choose not to because what the heck, you like to work and why not? And so this notion of coast is let's basically super fund our retirement. Let's put as much money away as we can in the early years, our 20s and 30s, and then pull back. We'll just reduce our work commitments. We don't necessarily go into what would be a traditional or classic sense of FI where you're completely done working, or a classic sense of retirement where you're no longer employed in any capacity, but you're just employed enough to kind of cover your expenses, your core cost. You don't need to save anymore because you've already saved enough. And now this savings, although it probably would be a stretch to make it work to fully cover you on its own regard, we're going to let these savings stew away for the next 10, 20, or 30 years. And we don't have to save anymore. We've put enough seeds in the ground that we're just going to sit and let this grow on its own and harvest it in 30 years' time. And at the same time, have the freedom and the flexibility and the knowledge that, look, I don't have to have this job, or I don't have to have this job under these current constraints or requirements. I want to change things up. I'm free to do so. And there's really tremendous power in it's really actually incredible. It's a huge negotiating chip because, employers like their employees. They don't want to see them go, don't want to let them go. And if someone can sit across the table and say, look, I don't like where this is going for me, I think I'm going to walk out the door. What tends to happen, what I've seen happen is you see a bump up in pay. Like, oh man, no, I don't want to see you go. What's it going to take to keep you around here? Do we have to change your schedule? Do we have to increase your hours? You want a bonus? Like, what's it going to take? So this coast is a great way to leverage your position and get it so that if you are still employed, you're employed on your own terms and not under the terms of your employer. What do you think about that, Andrew? I'm saying all this, realizing that, Andrew, it does work for us. Is he going to put this back on me?
I'm on my way to coast.
Oh, okay.
The idea of coast is really creating that brick, right? Putting that brick on the gas that you can walk away from it. And the power that Ben talks about is a really incredible amount of power. And I think it's not only a power between you and your employer, but it's also a power between you and yourself. Any of those like self doubts or anything else like that, oh, I need this, I need that. What you think you need at that point really changes, right? If you're able to kind of look at yourself at the end of the day and say, all right, I only need 20 hours a week of this job, which I'm very good at already. And after that, I can kind of do what I want. So this kind of coast thing is often what kind of happens with young professionals, especially these young professionals with 6-figure and up salaries that maybe have taken out a bunch of loans. They get the loans paid off, they get the house paid off, and now they're in a very well-paying job that perhaps is full of a lot of stress, and they kind of like come up for air at some point and say, I'm looking around and I've got the number that I need, where if I can just cover my daily living expenses, then my compounding gains on the investments that I have are going to bring me to that FI number, that magic number that everyone likes to talk about. And now at this point, what doors open for that person? What is the power that has now opened for that person? Not just at the bargaining table, but now like if they're able to reduce themselves to half-time work, what nascent hobbies that have been lying fallow for so long are now springing out. And maybe now here is a side hustle or there is a side source of income. And now that you're starting to really think, what would I love to do for the next 20, 30, 40 years? These could even become your entrepreneurial pursuits. These could become your business. And that's really the power of combining the idea of coast with your lean FI and your fat FI. And maybe even once you get into that coast situation, kind of flip-flopping in between the two. If you're about to start that business, you could kind of push yourself more towards lean and adjust things. If you're like, well, I like this 20 hours a week kind of situation, maybe 10 hours a week, I'm going to live a little bit more high on the hog, and we don't have to body shame either type of these FI definitions. But once you get into coast and you know that your investments are going to flow for you, that's when you're able to just open everything up.
Yeah, the reality is without focus, this is just a sad truth in our society, is I think a lot of people just don't give a lot of attention to their money. And when they become beholden on it, they become enslaved to it. And consequently, whether they realize or not, they become enslaved to their employers because they need that next paycheck in order to keep getting ahead or keep paying the bills. And if anything changes, they're on the short end of the stick. They just don't have a whole lot of say. The glorious, the beautiful thing about being focused on achieving some wealth and putting money aside and having only some security and freedom. Again, we spoke of financial security, financial freedom at prior stages in the last podcast. But the glorious thing of all that is now you aren't the one who's enslaved. You have greater command or control. And if you only do have the short end of the stick, you're probably leaving money on the table. You probably could have been paid more or had better benefits or had a better job experience. And maybe the things that you didn't like about your job that are causing you to go batty, there actually could be the possibility that all of that could go away if you could just get the financial situation in your own house straightened out. And now you've got the power to say no and walk away and say, if this job isn't working for me, I'm going to go somewhere else. Whether you want to go and achieve financial independence and be a lean FI and get there right away, there's some great things about that. And I have some own pursuits or interests in that regard because I just would like to have some more freedom on my time. But regardless, I think everybody should be shooting for this coast stage. I mean, if you're going to continue to be employed, you need to be focusing on coasting, because let's maximize your value in the workforce with your employers by demanding as high of a salary as you can get. And you're going to be able to do that by keeping yourself in a strong financial situation. And in order to be in a strong financial situation, we got to get your expenses under control, and we got to be doing a fair amount of savings. We're talking at least probably 20%. If we're going to get really aggressive, maybe we bump it up to 50% or more. But let's shoot for at least 20%. Let's get that savings underway. You're going to be in a lot better way, just for anybody, if you choose to do that. But let's talk a little bit, maybe pivoting now, Andrew. All of this FI does underpin or is beholden to this, your safe withdrawal rates. Like how much can you pull from your portfolio and still be able to hit your goal? Let's talk about that a little bit. This deserves really a whole episode in itself. I'm sure we'll have that in a future meeting.
Yeah, we should definitely 100%. So what we're talking about here is the famous and somewhat infamous 4% rule. And that's like you've got $1 million, you're able to take out 4% a year, then you've got $40,000 a year to live on. And this is supposed to be the money that's going to last you through indefinitely. Like the money is never supposed to run out. And most of the tests that they do on these, the Monte Carlo scenarios, and we'll touch upon it a little bit, is that the 4% rule checks out. Like you can basically have your investments and take out 4% a year in perpetuity and have that money there for you. The actual problem to the 4% rule is that it's a little bit too conservative. A lot of times in these estimates, they run it out, 30, 40 years. These people wind up dying with double what they started with. So the 4% rule overall is conservative. These things change, as Ben will let you know, if inflation is worse, if other things happen that are unforeseen. But generally, you would have to be the most unlucky individual in the history of mankind to screw this up if you do adhere by the 4% rule.
The 4% rule is the safe withdrawal rate. We'll have a dedicated episode here, but just to piggyback on some of it, Andrew was saying that the notion behind this is how much could someone pull out of their portfolio really agnostic to the current market conditions or your thoughts about the future markets, just completely in a black hole, unaware of anything that's happening. Like the work was done by William Bengen, in which now the historical record on this is pretty limited, and that's why there's some scrutiny on whether or not 4% is too high or too low. But the notion is how much he was analyzing this, how much could I pull out basically indifferent to market conditions and be safe and not have it be too much of a draw. And what he centered in on, some of the details, at least for now, is around 4%. Truth is it probably could be more than 4%. That's just the safe, like almost like a safe load on a steel beam or something. The reality is the beam probably could handle a lot more, but this is just to make sure it doesn't break. This is as much demand as you would put on it. 4% is a good rule of thumb. It's definitely a good rule of thumb for planning for FI. But the truth is your actual capacity on your portfolio. This would be a very pessimistic look into the markets for 4% to work. If we're optimistic at all, 4% is probably too low of a number. It's more like probably 5 to 5.5. And depending on the market conditions, it could even be higher than that. But there's now new work being called the dynamic withdrawal rate by John Guyton that really has driven this further along. So I think we'll give an episode to the dynamic withdrawal rate and elaborate upon that. But that's enough. So, the whole point of FI is achieving this safe withdrawal rate. How much do I have to save and then safely pull from the portfolio and not worry about running out of money, but ultimately can support this lifestyle indefinitely. It's roughly 4%, which equates to 25 times whatever your magic number is. So if you need $50,000 a year, it's going to be 25 times that amount, which I suppose is 1.25 million.
Yeah.
It's what you need to save towards.
Another important thing to keep in mind, though, is that we are talking about after-tax income. So you're talking about your investments generating for you after tax the amount that you spend. Whatever winds up in your pocket, that's the amount that you really do have to have there. So you've got to pay your taxes on it first and then still have the money to pay the bills. And, that is a pretty fair thing to remind people of if you just listen in there and saying, because that could mess you up pretty good if you're not thinking about it correctly.
Yeah, there's a big difference between gross income and net income. We're all pretty accustomed to our net income. Gross is what's, we have taxes being pulled out of that. When you're living on your own, you have to kind of take care of your own taxes. You don't have a payroll department or HR any longer who's figuring out how much to withdraw. And, there's no W-4s presumably. So there is an adjustment in terms of figuring out your gross income versus net income. That sounds like another episode, Andrew, we'll have to have on here. But pulling back to FI and fat FI and lean FI and coast, there are some ways in which we can stretch these numbers. The withdrawal rate aside, that's actually a pretty big one, but something just to throw in there as a way to accelerate your approach to FI. There's a big notion known as geographic arbitrage, which is just simply to say that the cost of living is not the same universally across the globe. Your dollar can go further in different areas or go shorter depending on the locale. And that's a combination of cost of living and just the expenses that it is to live in whatever particular spot it is. And part of what I mean by cost of living is housing costs, food costs, fuel costs. you guys know this. I mean, it is not the same wherever you go. The other big part of that is taxes. How much of your money is being subject to taxation? What ways is it being subject to taxation? You can have sales tax, income taxes, property taxes, estate taxes, even on a state level that may come into play. There's any number of ways in which you might be encountering taxation. That varies simply within the US as to where you live. The taxes are higher or lower depending on the locale. But similarly, it's higher or lower in different parts of the globe. Go outside the US. And quite frankly, you can live a very nice life outside of the US per an average US American dollars just because of the strength of the US dollar as it relates currency wise to other currencies. So, I mean, as Americans, we have the privilege to put that to our disposal. It may not always be there for us. Things come and go. Currently, that's present. And I suppose if we're wanting to maximize your financial resources and achieve financial independence, it would be a mistake not to have an eye to geographic arbitrage, either domestically within the country or internationally across the globe. Which I suppose, Andrew, what do you have to say to that? I mean, you're kind of an example of geo arbitrage, aren't you?
I'm living the dream, baby. Yeah. Geographic arbitrage is something that's near and dear to my heart. Our listeners may or may not know. I don't recall if I ever mentioned it, but I am actually right now based out of South Korea. So as we're recording these episodes, I'm in South Korea, where Ben is in the Midwest there in North Dakota. And I have been benefiting, and now more so than previously, I've been benefiting from geographic arbitrage where I live in South Korea, and the general cost of living here is a lot lower than it would be in the States. I could throw out some numbers to you. A family of three, we're paying $65 a month for our medical care. My rent is $200 a month. And so it's a beautiful situation if you can set yourself up where, as Tim Ferriss says, you're earning dollars and living on pesos. I may be living on the Korean won, but it's the same thing. So I'm able to work for and with Ben and get paid in US dollars. And instantly, before it hits my bank account, I've got a 20% bump on that, which again, we talk about this idea of freedom. Not only does it let me live a better life out here, it also lets me work with the people that I want to work with, be more selective about the projects I take, and if you wanted to, work less. So if you ever had thoughts of moving abroad, doing something in that type of space, and you've got a job that allows you to work remotely, I'm definitely here to tell you it is possible. And not only is it possible, it's highly enjoyable and highly satisfying.
And that's just a great plug, Andrew, because if any of you is interested in that, then you obviously know who we need to call. We've got an in-house expat.
Reach out. I'm always happy to have a chat about the conversation. Even now, as I'm a little bit older and I do have the family, I'm still always kind of looking around. There's some different websites out there that kind of like are always tickling the funny bone of, oh, where could we go next? And not all these decisions never have to be lifelong decisions, but a year in Europe or something like that is not outside of your reach. And you can do these things and even term them as mini retirements while you're still working and still, again, taking advantage of geo arbitrage and the strength of the US dollar and cost of living discrepancies between the US and other locations.
Yeah, isn't that just awesome? I love focusing. I mean, money's not the end all and be all of life.
No.
Zig Ziglar often would say it's not the most important thing, but it is something like oxygen. Not in cheek. I love that quote from Zig Ziglar, but it is pretty important, actually. I mean, I don't think any of us want to make it our ultimate goal in life, but boy, I tell you what, getting it right just helps you out so many ways financially, and it brings a lot of peace and joy and satisfaction. And yeah, these are important goals, important pursuits and areas of focus. Maybe as a recap, you could focus on different stages of FI, different stages of financial growth. There's some overlap between these two episodes with the last one. In a lot of ways, it's either financial security, financial independence, financial abundance. Here we're talking about lean FI, fat FI, coasting. The common theme in all this is, look, let's have a focus on your money. Let's have a focus on what's happening there. It doesn't need to be what you focus everything on. It's not the most important thing by any means, but let's focus on these things because it's powerful. It's life-changing. It just puts you in a better place. I think it puts the whole world and society in a better place, honestly. We all need to be giving an eye to our finances. So yeah, let's go and stretch and dig for it and focus. And if you want to go for lean FI, go for it. It's good and bad to that. Lean FI it's lean. So there's concerns there about it being too lean. But fat FI costs more. How quickly do you want to get there? If you're going to shoot for fat FI, you're going to be working longer. If you like your job, let's at least just get you to a point where you're maximizing your situation, leveraging every dollar you can out of your work arrangement. And by super saving and giving flexibility and freedom only to say no to your boss, walk away from the job and all go work with someone else who's going to pay you better.
Yeah, very well put. It's about choice. It's about freedom. And it's about mindset. You're the one that puts yourself there. So it is up to you at the end of the day. And hopefully what we do here can help empower people and educate people to get there in their own life and define what all these things mean to them.
For sure. In future episodes, we are the FI Entrepreneur. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship. We wanted to really flesh out this notion of FI. We're going to continue on with that for a while, but there will be additional episodes up and coming about how to do this as an entrepreneur, another love of my heart. And so super fun. Just love talking about this stuff. Glad you guys are listening, and stay tuned for the next one.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've had as much fun as we did. If you'd like to learn more about any of the subjects we spoke about, please visit our website for show notes, links, and more. Hit like, subscribe, or whatever button you've got in front of you to show some love. Remember, the information presented in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Remember what Teddy Roosevelt said about the person who strives greatly. If he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Until next time, keep striving.
Thanks again, and be well.